On the Salisbury Plain, under a sky that has watched empires rise and fall, stand the sarsen stones of Stonehenge. We begin not with the circle, but with a detail that is often overlooked. It is a point of connection where a 30-ton lintel rests atop two vertical pillars. Here, carved into the megaliths, are mortise and tenon joints. The tenon, a protruding peg on the upright stone, fits perfectly into the mortise, a corresponding hole in the horizontal lintel. This is not a rough stacking of stones. It is a precise, interlocking system designed for stability and permanence. The detail is small, almost intimate, when seen against the scale of the monument, yet it carries the weight of a profound and unsettling technical statement. One does not expect to find the principles of advanced carpentry applied to a medium as unforgiving as sarsen stone. The technique speaks of a deep familiarity with structural mechanics, a knowledge of how to distribute weight and resist the slow, persistent pressures of time. To shape such a joint requires more than brute force. It demands foresight, planning, and a mastery of angles and stress points. The hands that did this were not merely piling rocks. They were building, following a design that understood the properties of its material and the laws that govern physical structures. We see the result, a seamless fusion of mass and logic, but the process itself remains shrouded in an almost impossible quiet. This single detail forces a re-evaluation. A mortise and tenon joint is not an intuitive solution born from a first encounter with stone. It is the signature of a mature tradition. It suggests the transference of a pre-existing architectural rulebook, one likely perfected in a more malleable medium, like wood, over countless generations. The builders of Stonehenge were not inventing a method. They were applying a known and trusted protocol to a monumental new task. This is the first disturbance in the historical record. The appearance of a solution so sophisticated that it seems to imply a long history of development for which no other evidence exists. It is the clean, final draft of a story whose earlier chapters have been entirely erased. And so, we are left to stand before it, here in the long grass, as the wind moves across the plain. The air is cold. The stones themselves seem to hold the chill of centuries, absorbing the warmth of the day and radiating it back into the darkness of night. This is a place that demands silence, not for reverence, but for listening. The sound is not in the air. It is in the weight of the objects, in the precision of their placement, in the clear intention that has outlasted its original language by 5,000 years. This is a pause for absorption, a moment to let the scale of the object and the depth of its implication settle before moving on. The question is not yet formed, but the unease has begun. The archaeological record is meticulous on this point. Field notes from decades of excavation describe these joints with the dispassionate language of measurement and observation. Plaster casts have been made, laser scans have mapped their surfaces, and every dimension has been catalogued. The data is cold, objective, and undeniable. It exists in survey reports and academic papers, a set of numbers and diagrams that confirm the deliberate and precise nature of the work. The human researcher, with brush and trowel, uncovers the evidence, but the evidence does not align with the context in which it is found. The tools recovered from the same strata, antler picks and stone hammers, seem to belong to a different world than the one that conceived of these joints. This was not the work of an artist, but of a scribe. The intelligence behind this structure was not expressing a creative impulse. It was executing a formula, transcribing a set of established principles from an unseen blueprint onto the landscape. Each cut, each angle, each interlocking piece feels less like an act of invention and more like an act of recitation, a careful and deliberate repetition of a known truth. The consistency of the technique suggests a discipline, a school of thought passed down not through written words, but through practice and a shared, rigorous understanding of engineering. The builder's mind is visible here, and it is a mind that is systematic, patient, and utterly confident in its methods. To remain near this archive is to hold a place in the inquiry. The markers are few, and the silence between them is vast. This technical mastery is then placed against the backdrop of its time. The late Neolithic period, around 3000 BCE, is understood as an era of emergent farming communities, small tribal societies with limited social stratification and no known writing. The archaeological layers speak of a world of earthen long barrows, flint tools, and simple pottery. It is a world that, according to the established models of human development, should not have possessed the specialized labor, logistical organization, or abstract geometrical knowledge required to engineer a structure like Stonehenge. The dissonance is jarring. The artifact is in direct contradiction with the world that supposedly produced it. The most unsettling aspect is not the presence of this knowledge, but the absence of its context. Where are the prototypes, the practice pieces, the discarded failures that must precede such mastery? A tradition so advanced should leave 1,000 other traces, in smaller structures, in failed quarries, in the graves of its master builders. Yet the archaeological record is largely silent. Stonehenge appears not as the culmination of a long local development, but almost as an arrival, a fully formed idea executed with a precision that leaves no room for error. The perfection of the work is itself a historical problem, suggesting a source of knowledge that exists outside the visible timeline of the people who lived and died in this place. We are left, then, with the stone itself, a silent repository of a question that should not exist. It offers no narrative, no inscription, no clue as to the identity of its creators. Its purpose remains a subject of debate, but its method is a clear and legible statement. It speaks of a level of thinking that feels out of time, a technical dialect for which we have no dictionary. The monument does not provide an answer. It is the question, solidified into rock, and placed here to endure the erosion of millennia. It is the first marker on a trail that leads not to a lost people, but to a lost understanding of the world itself. The first entry in this archive is a location: southeastern Anatolia. The site is designated Göbekli Tepe. Radiocarbon analysis of organic material retrieved from the lowest excavated levels provides a date. The initial construction phase is placed at approximately 9500 BCE. This number is not a story. It is a coordinate in deep time, an anchor point fixed more than 6,000 years before the first stones were raised at Stonehenge, and 7,000 years before the first recognized writing appeared in Sumer. It is the first line in a ledger that does not balance. The primary structural components are monolithic pillars, carved from limestone quarries on a nearby ridge. They are T-shaped, standing as high as 18 feet and weighing up to 20 tons. These pillars are not arranged randomly. They are organized into a series of circular or oval enclosures, set within walls of uncut stone. In the center of each major enclosure stand two larger central pillars facing one another as if in silent convocation. The scale of the labor is documented in the sheer mass of quarried and transported stone. The surfaces of these pillars are not blank. They are covered in intricate, low-relief carvings of animals. The catalog is specific. It includes foxes, boars, gazelles, cranes, lions, vultures, and scorpions. These are not simple outlines. The anatomy is precise, the postures are dynamic, and they are arranged in complex scenes whose meaning is unrecorded. In some instances, the pillars themselves are stylized into abstract human forms, with arms carved along their sides and hands pointing toward their center. The execution is systematic, a consistent artistic grammar applied across the entire complex. The archaeological context for this site is defined by what was found in the same geological strata. The builders of Göbekli Tepe are identified through their tools and refuse as a pre-agricultural society. Their toolkit consisted of flint points, stone scrapers, and obsidian blades. Faunal remains indicate a diet based on the hunting of wild game and the gathering of wild plants. There is no evidence of domesticated animals, cultivated grains, or permanent settlement. The official record states that a society of hunter-gatherers organized the labor to build a temple complex of this magnitude. The archive then shifts its focus westward, to the coast of Brittany and France. Here, the record is one of immense quantity. The Karnak alignments consist of more than 3,000 prehistoric standing stones, or menhirs. The material is local granite. The stones vary in size, from under a meter to over 4 meters in height. The sheer number of individual elements marks this not as a monument, but as a system, a vast and ordered field of markers laid out across the landscape. These stones are not a scattered collection. They are arranged into multiple subsystems, the most prominent being long, parallel lines that run for several kilometers. The alignments at Le Menec, for instance, consist of 11 converging rows of menhirs stretching for 165 meters. The precision of these lines, maintained over such a distance and across uneven terrain, implies a sophisticated understanding of surveying. The record here is not of a single structure, but of a geometric principle applied to an entire region. Chronological dating places the Karnak system's construction between 4500 and 3300 BCE. This places it in the Middle Neolithic period, a contemporary of other megalithic traditions across Western Europe. The date itself is another entry, a point on a timeline that connects it to a broader phenomenon. Yet it offers no explanation for the logistical capacity required to quarry, transport, and erect 3,000 stones according to a unified geometric plan. The labor force is estimated to have been in the thousands. A recurring detail appears in the survey logs of other distant sites. The work of the engineer Alexander Thom in the mid-20th century proposed a standard unit of measurement, which he termed the megalithic yard. This unit, approximately 72 imperial feet, or 9 centimeters, was identified through statistical analysis of the dimensions and layouts of hundreds of megalithic sites across Great Britain and Brittany. It appears in the diameter of stone circles and the spacing of rows, with a consistency that suggests a shared, unwritten building code. The logistical record for Stonehenge presents a different kind of problem. The monument is composed of two primary types of stone. The smaller blue stones, weighing between 2 and 4 tons each, have been geologically traced to a specific origin: the Preseli Hills in western Wales. The distance from this quarry to the Salisbury Plain is over 150 miles, a journey that would have crossed rivers, forests, and difficult terrain. The transport of 80 such stones is a fact entered into the record, but the method remains undocumented. The larger sarsen stones present a challenge of scale. These form the outer circle and the central trilithons. Their weights average 25 tons, with the largest pieces approaching 50. Geochemical analysis confirms their origin as the Marlborough Downs, approximately 20 miles north of the site. The record notes the quarrying of this dense sandstone and its transport, but the tools recovered from the period, stone mauls and antler picks, do not fully account for the precision of the shaping that was to follow. Another layer of data emerges from the study of enclosed megalithic chambers. Acoustic testing conducted at sites such as the cairns of Loughcrew in Ireland and the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni in Malta has revealed unusual resonant properties. These chambers appear to amplify sound at specific low frequencies, particularly between 95 and 120 Hz. This effect is a physical property of the structures, a result of their specific dimensions and materials. The record shows an architecture that engages not only sight and alignment, but also sound. The silence in these records is as measured as the stones. Notice the quiet in the room where you are now, the time on the clock. It is simply a marker, passing. The focus shifts to another island, to the Boyne Valley in Ireland. Here stands the passage tomb of Newgrange, a large circular mound covering an area of over 1 acre. It is dated to approximately 3200 BCE, making it 500 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, and 1,000 years older than the main phase of construction at Stonehenge. Its facade is of white quartz, and its entrance is marked by a massive, intricately carved curbstone. The structure's most precise feature is an astronomical alignment of extreme accuracy. Above the main entrance is a small, box-like opening known as a roof box. For a period of several days around the winter solstice, the rising sun projects a narrow beam of light through this opening. The beam penetrates the full length of the 19-meter-long inner passage and illuminates the floor of the central chamber. This event lasts for approximately 17 minutes each day. The durability of the construction is another cold fact in the engineering log. The roof of the central chamber at Newgrange is a corbelled vault, built with overlapping layers of large stone slabs without the use of mortar. Despite the immense weight of the earthen mound above it, and after more than 5,000 years of Irish weather, this roof has remained structurally sound and almost completely waterproof. It is a testament to a mastery of load-bearing principles and intuitive engineering. The technique of shaping stone to interlock, so prominent at Stonehenge, is not an isolated case. A comparative analysis of Neolithic sites notes the presence of similar, though less monumental, stone joining methods in the dolmens and passage graves of Brittany. The use of rudimentary tongue and groove joints and fitted slabs suggests that the underlying principle of treating stone like wood was part of a wider architectural vocabulary. It appears in the record not as a singular invention, but as a recurring technical phrase. A final procedural entry comes from the earliest site, Göbekli Tepe. After approximately 1,500 years of use and expansion, the entire complex was deliberately and methodically buried. Around 8000 BCE, the enclosures were filled in with debris, primarily composed of crushed limestone, stone fragments, and animal bones. This was not a collapse or a slow abandonment. The evidence points to an intentional act of interment, a systematic sealing of the site under tons of fill that ultimately created the artificial hill we see today. The contents of this fill provide the final line item for this act. The material used to bury the temples contains no evidence of agriculture. The animal bones are exclusively from wild species. The human artifacts are the same flint tools used by the builders. The record closes where it opened, with a monumental construction that was both built and entombed by a pre-agricultural people. The file is closed, the data presented. There is no summary, no conclusion, only the stark, irreconcilable facts. The records are laid out, no longer as singular entries, but as a collection of cold cases spread across a vast, dark table. Here, the report on Göbekli Tepe, dated to the dawn of our current age. Beside it, the survey maps of Karnak, 6,000 years younger. And here, the structural analysis of Stonehenge and Newgrange, separated by an ocean channel but only a few centuries. They are islands of data, isolated by geography and by immense, silent stretches of time. At first glance, they share nothing but the ambition of their scale and the mystery of their origins. The space between them is the first object of study. The researcher begins the work of comparison, a slow and deliberate act of alignment. The first column in this new ledger is the material itself: limestone monoliths in Anatolia, granite menhirs in Brittany, Sarsen sandstone and Welsh bluestone on the Salisbury Plain. In every instance, the choice is for the largest, most durable local stone available. The effort required was always at the absolute limit of, or perhaps beyond, the assumed capacity of the builders. The physical medium was chosen not for its convenience, but for its ability to resist entropy. This is a foundational decision, a shared architectural premise repeated across millennia. The intent was permanence. The builders, whoever they were not constructing for their own lives, or for the lives of their children. They were building for a timescale that defies the human measure of history. The stone itself was the first and most crucial element of the message, a declaration that what was being encoded here was meant to outlast memory, to survive the collapse of language and the erosion of cultures. It was a communication designed for the deep future. A second column is drawn. The focus shifts from material to sheer physical undertaking. The researcher catalogs the numbers. 20-ton pillars at Göbekli Tepe, quarried and moved with flint tools. 3,000 individual stones at Karnak, erected in precise lines across kilometers of uneven ground. 50-ton lintels at Stonehenge, lifted and secured dozens of feet in the air. These are not just impressive feats. They represent a logistical equation that was solved time and again by societies that theoretically lacked the administrative and social structures to even pose the question. The repetition of this logistical mastery is the first clear, unsettling pattern. It implies that the core problem, how to mobilize and direct the labor of thousands of individuals over multiple generations toward a single abstract goal, had a known solution. This solution was applied in different parts of the world by different peoples over a span of 7,000 years. The monuments themselves are the physical proof that this organizational technology existed. It was a science of social mechanics, a formula for achieving the impossible, and it has left no other record of its existence. We pause here to let the weight of this shared effort settle. The sound of stone being dragged, the slow, patient chipping of a flint blade against a limestone surface, the coordinated rhythm of 100 bodies straining to raise a single megalith. These are the sounds that connect these disparate sites. The human energy expended, the lives dedicated to these projects, form a continuous echo that reverberates from the hills of Anatolia to the plains of England. It is the sound of a single immense undertaking, performed in chapters thousands of years apart. The researcher's attention turns to the sky. The tools are no longer brushes and trowels, but astronomical charts and survey data. The precise winter solstice alignment of the roof box at New Grange is placed into the record. It is set alongside the known solstitial sightlines of Stonehenge's main axis and the complex lunar calculations embedded in its Aubrey holes. The long avenues of Karnak are re-examined, not just as lines on the ground, but as vectors pointing toward horizons, marking the rising and setting points of celestial bodies. A pattern of deliberate, sophisticated astronomical observation becomes undeniable. This shared focus on the sky reveals a deeper layer of coherence. These structures were not merely built upon the Earth. They were designed to be in dialogue with the cosmos. They are immense instruments for marking time, not the time of days or seasons, but the slow, grand cycles of the sun, moon, and stars. This implies a shared worldview, a cosmology that saw the heavens as a source of order and knowledge, and a desire to anchor that celestial order onto the terrestrial landscape. The purpose was to create a fixed, permanent calendar of cosmic proportion. To continue observing this archive as it is assembled is to acknowledge the weight of this emerging connection. It is a commitment to remain with the evidence, wherever it leads. The inquiry now moves from function to form. The researcher compares the visual language of the pillars. At Göbekli Tepe, the T-shaped monoliths are given stylized arms and hands, abstract representations of a human or humanoid figure. They stand in circles, facing inward, as if in a silent assembly. At Stonehenge, the great trilithons are not merely pillars. They are gateways, immense post and lintel structures that create thresholds. They define an inside and an outside, forcing movement and framing sightlines. In these distinct architectural forms, a shared principle can be discerned. The structures are not just objects to be viewed from a distance. They are spaces designed to be inhabited and experienced. They are interactive. The anthropomorphic pillars of Göbekli Tepe create a sense of presence, of being among silent giants. The trilithons of Stonehenge guide and channel human perception. In both Anatolia and England, separated by 6 millennia, The architecture is fundamentally theatrical, designed to create a specific psychological or ritualistic state in the observer who moves within it. The focus now narrows to the smallest, most technical detail. The researcher places the plaster casts of the Stonehenge mortise and tenon joints on the table. Beside them are placed diagrams of the tongue and groove fittings found in the Neolithic dolmens of Brittany, and the engineering analysis of Newgrange's perfectly interlocking corbelled roof. The evidence is specific, a collection of solutions to complex structural problems. It is a comparative study in prehistoric engineering, and here the pattern becomes profoundly strange. It is the recurrence of a single, highly specific idea, treating massive stone as if it were wood. The principle of interlocking separate components to create a stable, unified structure is not an obvious or intuitive way to build with megaliths. It is a technique transferred from another discipline, another material. For this sophisticated, non-essential construction philosophy to appear in multiple unconnected locations suggests the transmission of a specific craft, a formal school of thought. It is the signature of a single, coherent engineering tradition. The room is quiet. The scattered data points no longer seem random. A shape is beginning to form from the evidence, a faint outline connecting these ancient sites. They now appear less like isolated anomalies, and more like the surviving fragments of a single broken chain. The silence in the historical record has not been filled, but its nature has changed. It is no longer the silence of absence, but the silence of a deliberate and profound erasure. The researcher now performs the final act of this analysis, the alignment of the timelines. Göbekli Tepe is pinned at 9500 BCE. A vast gap follows. Then, the Karnak system begins around 4500 BCE. 1,000 years later, Newgrange is built around 3200 BCE, and Stonehenge's main phase begins shortly after, around 3000 BCE. The dates are plotted, and the intervals between them are measured in millennia. These were not concurrent developments. They were pulses, bursts of immense activity separated by long periods of apparent dormancy. This chronology presents the central, defining contradiction of the pattern. The tradition itself demonstrates continuity of principle in logistics, astronomy, and engineering, but the historical record shows only discontinuity. How does a complex body of technical and organizational knowledge survive for thousands of years without a continuous civilization to carry it? How is it transmitted across these immense temporal voids, only to re-emerge with its core tenets intact? The work implies a master, but the timeline shows only orphans. We are left with two facts that cannot coexist within our current model of the past. The first is the undeniable evidence of a coherent megalithic system, a building protocol that was understood and executed across a significant portion of the globe for at least 7,000 years. The second is the complete and total absence, in any archaeological or historical record, of the people or state-level society that would have been required to develop, maintain, and transmit such a system. The researcher steps back from the aligned records. The pattern is there, clear and repeating. But the pattern is not of a civilization we can name. It is the blueprint of a presence that is only visible through its monumental works. It is a ghost defined by the sheer mass of the objects it left behind, a vast and patient intelligence whose name, language, and memory have been almost entirely lost to the silence of deep time. The question has shifted. It is no longer what these individual sites are, but what the invisible thread that connects them was. The patterns are no longer enough. A recurring design implies a designer. A coherent system implies a system builder. The inquiry must now shift from the work to the worker, from the effect to the cause. But the historical record, when searched for a name or a face, returns only a profound and deliberate silence. The intelligence behind this global project does not appear as a king, a priest, or a people. It appears only as a set of dispassionate recurring functions, Like the protocols of an administration so ancient, its name has been lost even to myth. We can only observe these functions as they are registered in the stone itself. The first of these functions is that of the surveyor. This is the intelligence that selected the sites. The record of this action is written into the geology and geography of every major megalithic center. The selection criteria appear to have been systematic. Locations with specific geological properties, on elevated ground with clear, unobstructed horizons, often possessing unusual magnetic or acoustic characteristics. The choice was not based on proximity to population centers or arable land. It was based on a different set of priorities, a planetary survey conducted according to a logic we can no longer access. We see the result of this survey in the placement of Göbekli Tepe atop a mountain ridge, commanding a view of the entire Anatolian plain. We see it in the choice of the Salisbury Plain, a vast chalk plateau that acts as a stable, elevated stage for the celestial theater. And we see it in the coastal setting of Karnak, where the alignments interact with the low, flat horizon of the sea. These were not accidental choices. They were the first, foundational acts of a premeditated design, the pinning of specific coordinates onto a global map. One is left to imagine the silence of that initial survey, the time before any work began, the slow, patient process of observation and measurement, of walking the land not to settle it, but to read it, to identify the precise points where the earth and sky could be brought into a specific, engineered relationship. This was an act of profound cartographic will, an imposition of a conceptual grid onto the raw material of the world. The silence before the first stone was moved is the silence of pure planning. The second function to appear in the record is that of the transmitter of the canon. This is the mechanism by which a specific and highly complex body of knowledge was preserved and passed down, intact, across millennia. The canon included precise astronomical data, advanced principles of structural engineering, a standardized unit of measurement, and a consistent geometric language. The evidence for this function lies not in any single monument, but in the repetition of these technical signatures across vast distances of time and space. The mortise and tenon joints at Stonehenge are not an isolated invention. They are an application of this received canon. The consistent use of the megalithic yard across Britain and Brittany is not a coincidence. It is the mark of a shared, standardized system. The precise solstitial alignment at Newgrange is not a lucky guess. It is the result of a formula, a piece of astronomical software executed in stone. The work of the transmitter was to ensure this knowledge was copied perfectly, from one generation to the next, without error or deviation. This implies an order, a school, or a caste of individuals whose entire purpose was the guardianship of this knowledge. They were not necessarily the builders themselves. They were the keepers of the blueprint, the living memory of the tradition. Their role was to carry the core principles through the rise and fall of lesser, more transient cultures, ensuring the integrity of the information until the time came for the next great work to be initiated. They were the librarians of a tradition that had no books. The wind that blows across the Salisbury Plain carries no memory of this. The stones themselves do not speak of it. But the precision of their placement, the logic of their connection, stands as a testament to this unbroken chain of transmission. The knowledge was the critical element, more important than any single structure. The structures were merely the temporary, physical expression of a timeless, unchanging set of instructions. We then observe the third function, the organizer of labor. This is the application of a specific social technology, a methodology for mobilizing and directing the efforts of thousands of people over periods that spanned multiple human lifetimes. This function was not ideological or religious in the way we understand it. It was logistical and administrative. It solved the problem of transforming a pre-agricultural or early agricultural society into a disciplined, focused workforce capable of executing monumental engineering projects. The record of this function is written in tons of quarried stone. It is in the 80 bluestones, moved over 150 miles from the Welsh hills to Stonehenge. It is in the 3,000 granite menhirs of Carnac, dragged from their quarries and erected in perfect alignment. It is in the immense 50,000-ton artificial mound that was heaped over Newgrange. These are not the works of inspired amateurs. They are the products of a managed, hierarchical, and sustained logistical operation. The sheer efficiency of this operation suggests that the organizers were not part of the local population they directed. They appear to have acted as an external catalyst, providing the organizational structure, the technical expertise, and the long-term project management that local tribal societies would have lacked. They brought the plan and the method. The local inhabitants provided the labor. The result was a recurring historical anomaly, a primitive society suddenly demonstrating a capacity for organization far beyond its developmental stage. One sits in the central chamber of a passage tomb and feels the weight of this organization. Every stone in the corbelled roof above is perfectly placed, distributing tons of earth and rock. It is a feeling of immense, coordinated pressure, held in perfect equilibrium for 5,000 years. The human effort is palpable, but the directing intelligence, the voice that gave the commands, is entirely absent. There is only the flawless execution of the plan. The final function is the most unsettling. It is the sealer of the record. This is the intelligence that, after centuries or even millennia of use, directed the systematic and deliberate burial of a site. This act is not one of destruction or abandonment. It is a careful, procedural decommissioning, a conscious act of erasing the site from the landscape while perfectly preserving it beneath the earth. The primary evidence for this function comes from the first and oldest site, Göbekli Tepe. Around 8000 BCE, after 15 centuries of continuous building and use, the entire complex was methodically filled in. The great T-shaped pillars, the circular enclosures, the carved reliefs, all were buried under tons of rubble consisting of limestone fragments, flint tools, and animal bones. The archaeological analysis is clear. This was an intentional interment, an act as monumental and labor-intensive as the original construction. It was the final step in the protocol. This action reframes the entire project. It suggests these sites were not meant to be permanent fixtures in the human world. They had a designated lifespan, a planned obsolescence. The building, the use, and the eventual burial were all part of a single, continuous process. The sealing was not an end caused by disaster or invasion. It was the scheduled conclusion of a specific operation. The file was being closed. And so, the presence we have been tracking is defined as much by its deliberate withdrawal as by its monumental constructions. It operated according to a vast, inhuman timescale, executing a plan whose purpose is unrecorded. It surveyed the planet, transmitted a canon of technical knowledge, organized the labor of disconnected peoples, and then, when the work was done, it systematically erased its own presence. It left behind only the buried stones, silent archives waiting for a future inquiry that it must have known would one day come. The work of the inquiry now shifts. It turns away from the solid evidence of the stone and toward the immense unmeasured space between the records. The focus is no longer on what is present in the archive, but on what is missing. The primary object of study becomes the silence itself, the vast chronological voids, the absent layers in the earth, the sudden, inexplicable interruptions in the transmission of knowledge. This is the domain of the antagonist, the quiet and pervasive force of erasure that has redacted the most critical chapters of this story, leaving behind a narrative defined by its gaps. The first and most profound of these gaps is the chasm that follows the burial of Göbekli Tepe. Around 8000 BCE, the site is deliberately interred, and the signal of monumental construction vanishes from the archaeological record. For the next 3,500 years, the Earth is quiet. This is a period longer than the entire span of recorded human history, from the first Sumerian cuneiform to the present day. For over 100 generations, the knowledge, the organization, and the will to build on this scale appear to have gone entirely dormant. We must pause and attempt to comprehend the scale of this quiet. Imagine a tradition of immense power and sophistication simply ceasing to manifest for 35 centuries. It is not a slow decline or a gradual transformation into other forms. It is a sudden and total cessation, a line drawn in the dirt of history. The builders, their canon of knowledge, and their organizational technology retreat from the physical world, leaving behind only the simple, scattered cultures of early farmers and foragers who seem to hold no memory of the giants who once walked among them. The archaeological record for this long interval is unambiguous. Across the Near East and Europe, the layers of earth corresponding to this period reveal the slow, localized development of agriculture. They show small villages, simple pottery, and the tombs of local chieftains, but they do not show the continuation of the megalithic project. The unique signature of massive astronomically aligned stone structures is completely absent. It is as if a great light was switched off in Anatolia, and the world was plunged into a long, monumental darkness. The problem of the missing developmental stages, first noted at Stonehenge, becomes a recurring theme of this absence. When the megalithic signal reappears in Western Europe around 4500 BCE with structures like Karnak, it does so without a local prelude. There are no small-scale practice alignments, no failed attempts at quarrying, no gradual evolution of the required surveying techniques. As with Göbekli Tepe before it, the tradition seems to arrive fully formed, its methods perfected, its logistical challenges already solved. The record is missing its entire first act, time and again. Another profound silence is found in the ground itself, in the absence of the builders' final resting places. A tradition of this magnitude, spanning millennia and commanding the labor of thousands, must have been guided by an elite class of architects, engineers, and astronomer priests. Yet, their graves are unknown. No tombs have ever been identified that contain the tools, the plans, or the insignia of these master builders. They were powerful enough to reshape the landscape of a continent, but they remain personally invisible, leaving no monuments to their own lives or lineages. This is an erasure of a different kind. It is not the passive decay of time, but what appears to be a deliberate commitment to anonymity. It suggests a philosophy where the work itself was the only legacy, and the identity of the individual creator was considered irrelevant. The intelligence that guided this project did not seek fame or eternal remembrance for itself. It sought only the perfect execution and preservation of the canon, a goal for which personal identity was willingly sacrificed, leaving us with an immense body of work created by ghosts. The very mechanism of transmission is the greatest of these voids. A complex body of technical knowledge cannot survive for thousands of years in a pre-literate society without a continuous and disciplined chain of initiation. Yet, there is no evidence for the schools, the guilds, or the monastic orders that would have been required to carry this knowledge through the long, dark millennia between Göbekli Tepe and Karnak. The connection is broken, yet the information, the sacred geometry, the astronomical constants, the engineering principles somehow makes the journey. This is a silence of language. Across 7,000 years of construction, from the first pillar in Anatolia to the last lintel in Britain, not a single word was ever carved. No inscriptions dedicate the structures to a king or a god. No tablets record the calculations used in their design. No stele proclaims the laws or beliefs of their creators. The entire system operated in a state of profound, intentional muteness. The knowledge was encoded directly into the stone and the landscape, a language of form, alignment, and resonant frequency. But the key to its grammar has been lost. Take a moment to register this quiet. The space between the sounds. It is also part of the record. Even within the periods of activity, the signal is not constant. The work at Karnak was not a single, continuous project but a series of pulses spread over more than 1,000 years. Great avenues were laid out, and then the work would cease for generations, only to be resumed later by people who still understood the original plan. This pattern of intermittent activity suggests a presence that was not permanently settled in one location, but one that could withdraw and return, initiating new phases of construction according to a timetable we cannot discern. At Stonehenge, the process of erasure takes the form of a slow, deliberate decommissioning. The monument was not destroyed in a single cataclysmic event. Instead, it was altered, rearranged, and ultimately abandoned over centuries. The final phases of its use show a diminishing of the original knowledge, a fading of the purpose for which its precise alignments were created. The memory was not shattered. It was allowed to slowly and quietly dissipate, until the Great Circle became a place of myth and folklore, its original function forgotten by the very people who lived in its shadow. The layers in the earth tell a story of insertion. At many of these sites, the archaeological strata immediately preceding the megalithic construction show a simple, local culture. Then, abruptly, the monumental work begins, executed with a sophistication that has no local precedent. And after the work ceases, the layers that follow often show a return to that same simple local culture. The megalithic phase appears as a foreign element, a temporary intrusion of immense technical and organizational capacity into a world that was otherwise unprepared for it. The most complete erasure of all is the removal of purpose. We can measure the stones, map the alignments, and analyze the engineering, but we cannot answer the fundamental question: why? No coherent tradition, myth, or historical account has survived to explain the ultimate goal of this planet-spanning, multi-millennial project. Was it an astronomical observatory, a temple for a forgotten religion, a machine for harnessing telluric energies, or something else entirely? The memory of the intent, the central driving idea, has been so thoroughly removed that we are left to project our own meanings onto its silent, inscrutable forms. This is not the forgetting of a detail, it is the forgetting of a world. The scale of the work implies a purpose of commensurate importance, a reason that could motivate generations to dedicate their lives to a single, abstract goal. For the memory of that purpose to be so completely lost suggests that the forgetting itself was not an accident of time. It feels like the result of a process, a systematic and successful effort to redact the very reason for the existence of these structures from the memory of the human species. The invisible antagonist now has a clear form. It is not simply the passive decay of deep time. It is an active principle of erasure, a force or a protocol that dictates the sealing of the sites, the breaking of the informational chain, and the removal of all explanatory records. It is the silence that follows the work, a silence so profound it seems to be part of the original design. The project included its own deletion. What we are left with, then, are not the complete monuments of a lost civilization. They are the fragments that survived the erasure, the pieces that were too large or too deeply buried to be entirely removed from the record. We are not reading a book with missing pages. We are trying to reconstruct an entire library from a few scattered, untranslatable paragraphs. The stones are not the message. They are the evidence that a message once existed and was then deliberately withdrawn. And so we stand in the void, in the space between two great sarsens on the plain, or in the millennia of quiet that separate one great work from the next. The wind moves through this space, carrying dust and the scent of damp earth. This emptiness is not a lack of evidence. It is the evidence itself. It is the final and most powerful statement of the builders, a demonstration of a power sufficient not only to mark the world, but to unmark it, to leave behind a question so vast that it becomes its own silent, enduring monument. The entire framework of the investigation must now be tilted on its axis. The question is not about a lost civilization in the human sense, a kingdom or an empire that rose and fell. The scale of the timeline, the consistency of the engineering, and the sheer geographical spread of the work suggest we are not looking for another version of ourselves in the deep past. The data points to an operation, a project executed on a planetary scale by an intelligence whose relationship to time and to the Earth itself was fundamentally different from our own. The stones are not the legacy of a people. They are the artifacts of a presence. This presence did not build monuments. It appears to have installed an infrastructure. The great megalithic sites cease to look like isolated temples or tombs and begin to resemble the surviving nodes of a vast, interconnected system. A network whose purpose was not communication in our sense, nor trade, nor defense. It was a grid designed to interface with the planet and the cosmos in a way we no longer comprehend, its functions encoded in alignment, resonance, and sacred geometry. We are like a later uncomprehending culture, finding the scattered pylons of a power grid for which the power has long been shut off. The silence of this network is its most defining characteristic. It performed its function without a name, without a written language, without a recorded history. It operated in the background of the human world, a silent, global program running for 7,000 years. The Neolithic peoples who lived and died in the shadows of these structures were not its authors. They were, perhaps, its first observers, its contracted labor, or simply the incidental witnesses to a process that was not for them. Their flint tools and simple pottery are not a contradiction. They are the context that proves the work was an insertion from outside their world. The implication is that the intelligence behind this project was not native to a single time or place. It behaved like a visiting entity, not necessarily from the stars, but from outside the normal linear progression of human cultural development. It arrived with a complete blueprint and a mature technology. It surveyed the terrain, selected the nodes, directed the construction, and then, its work completed, it withdrew. Its interaction with humanity was purely functional, a temporary utilization of a workforce to achieve a goal that remained entirely its own. This reframes the long chronological gaps in the record. The millennia of silence between Göbekli Tepe and Karnak were not a period of forgetting. They may have been a planned interval, a necessary pause in a long and patient process. The system was not meant to be in continuous, visible operation. It was a project of immense, slow pulses, of activations and dormancies that operated on a timescale more akin to geology than to history. The builders were not gone. They were simply waiting for the correct moment in a celestial or terrestrial cycle to begin the next phase of the work. One must stand before a single unadorned menhir at Karnak and feel this. Feel the patience. The stone has waited here for 6,000 years. It is not impatient for our understanding. It simply is. It holds its position, a single data point in a vast and silent calculation, its purpose fulfilled long ago. The wind that moves through the lines of stones carries the same indifference, the same sense of a time scale that dwarfs our own fleeting inquiries. The erasure, then, was not a hostile act of an antagonist. It was the final, procedural step of the project itself. The systematic burial of Göbekli Tepe was not a destruction. It was an act of preservation, a careful sealing of the archive. The gradual abandonment of Stonehenge was not a failure. It was a scheduled decommissioning. The entire system was designed to be temporary, an intervention with a defined beginning, a long operational life, and a clean, quiet end. The builders were not defeated by time. They concluded their work and tidied the site. This changes everything. We are not looking at the dawn of human civilization. We may be looking at the faint, residual evidence of a project that concluded just as our own recorded history was beginning. The world we have inherited is not a blank slate upon which we are the first to write. It is a world that has already been surveyed, marked, and utilized for a purpose we have forgotten. We are living not in the beginning of a story, but in the long, quiet aftermath of a different one. The knowledge itself, the precise astronomy, the advanced engineering, the understanding of acoustics, was therefore never truly ours. It was a technology that was deployed for the duration of the project and then withdrawn from common use. It was not a seed that was planted to grow into human science. It was a set of specialized tools used for a specific job and then locked away. The memory of it was not meant to be carried forward. The silence was part of the design. We are left, then, in a profoundly altered landscape. The ground beneath our feet is not just the repository of our own ancestors' bones and artifacts. It is also the archive of a concluded operation. The great megalithic sites are the silent, unlabeled hardware of a system that has been powered down. Their purpose is gone, but their physical presence remains, a permanent and unsettling reminder that our history is nested within another, much larger and stranger history. To continue this inquiry is to acknowledge that the path does not lead to a familiar past. It leads to the edge of what we thought our world was. The archive remains open for those who choose to stay with the record, as it unfolds. The feeling is one of profound and unsettling inheritance. We are not the descendants of the builders, but perhaps only the tenants of the structure they left behind. The Earth itself, and we have lived here for millennia, unaware of the original architecture, unaware of the purpose for which its foundations were laid. We have built our own civilizations atop the faint, geometric scars of their work, mistaking their silent machinery for sacred stones and their abandoned work sites for the tombs of our own kings. This suggests that the others were not gods, kings, or aliens in the way we imagine them. They were a function, an organizing principle, a systematic and rational intelligence that engaged with the physical world in a way we do not. They were a force of pure intention, visible only through the precise and orderly disturbance they left behind in the stone of the planet. Their identity is irrelevant. Their work is the only testament, and it speaks not of personality, but of protocol. The contradiction of the archaeological record is therefore resolved. The Neolithic peoples were exactly what the evidence shows them to be: early farmers and hunter-gatherers. They did not build these structures from their own knowledge. They were the hands, but not the mind. The two realities, the simple, local culture and the advanced, global project, coexisted for a time, a brief and inexplicable intersection of two entirely different streams of existence. And so, the final overarching implication settles. The history of this planet may contain chapters that are not about us at all. The human story may be a recent and localized phenomenon that has played out on a stage that was built for an entirely different performance. The megaliths are not the first act of our play. They are the set dressing left over from the final act of another. We are left standing in the quiet of this possibility. The wind blows across the Salisbury Plain, the same wind that has blown for 10,000 years. It moves through the great sarsens, which do not respond. They are markers of a concluded time, a silent testament to a world that existed alongside our own, and then, by its own design, receded from view, leaving behind only these immense, unanswerable questions carved in stone. The work is done. The archive, for now, is closed. We are left in a quiet room, after hours. The air is still, scrubbed clean of the day's traffic, and the only sound is the low hum of the climate control system, a mechanical breath holding entropy at bay. Here, under the focused, sterile light of a museum, rests a single object, a fragment loaned from the earth of Anatolia. It is a cast of a relief carving from one of the great pillars, removed from its context of wind and open sky, and placed here, in this curated silence, for observation. Around it, in other halls, lie the artifacts of civilizations we know. Clay tablets from Sumer, covered in the dense, wedge-shaped marks of their accounts and their laws. Papyrus scrolls from Egypt, their hieroglyphs still speaking of dynasties and gods. These are the records of our own story, difficult to translate perhaps, but they are a language. They speak of harvests and kings, of battles and beliefs. They are the familiar, catalogued memories of the human family, a history that, however distant, feels like our own. But this stone is different. It sits apart under its own solitary light. It is not a text. The figures carved into its surface, a vulture, a scorpion, are rendered with a stark, undeniable clarity. Yet they form no sentence we can read. They are not a record of a transaction or a tribute to a ruler. They are a statement made in a language that seems to predate the very concept of language itself, a grammar of pure form. The object offers no narrative. It only offers its own immense and silent presence. The surface is cool to the eye. One can trace the tool marks, the patient scraping and chipping that gave it shape 12,000 years ago. The hands that did this work are gone. The minds that held the design are gone. The world that required this image to be carved into a 20-ton pillar is gone. All that remains is the result, an effect severed from its cause, a single physical fact that has outlasted its own meaning by 100 centuries. It is not an artifact of a culture. It feels more like a piece of abandoned equipment. Here, in this final quiet, the scale of the question solidifies. The search was never for a lost city or a forgotten king. It was for the context of this object. The silence it emits is not the simple absence of sound. It is an active, resonant silence, the kind that follows a great and powerful event. It is the quiet of a worksite after the builders have packed their tools and departed, leaving behind a finished structure whose purpose is no longer visible, a function that has been concluded. We are not looking at the beginning of something. We are standing in the deep, quiet aftermath. The megalithic project, in all its planetary scale and temporal patience, was not the dawn of our civilization. It was the twilight of another kind of order, one that operated on principles we have yet to rediscover. Its withdrawal from the world was so complete, so procedurally clean, that it left behind almost no memory, only these strange, monumental pieces of evidence. The dust motes drift in the beam of light, each a tiny world turning in its own slow time. They settle on the glass case, on the polished floor, on the surface of the stone itself. A slow, gentle process of accumulation, a reminder that time does not only erase, it also buries. It preserves. The act of sealing Göbekli Tepe was not an act of destruction. It was a burial, an intentional placement of the record into the deep archive of the earth, to wait. Perhaps it was waiting for us, for a species that would one day develop the tools to find it, to date it, to measure its alignments, and to stand before it with the correct, unsettling questions. Perhaps the entire 7,000-year project was not a construction for its own time, but a message placed in the deep future. A marker designed to be discovered only when the inhabitants of the planet were ready to comprehend the true scale of the history that lies beneath their feet. The night outside the museum window is absolute. The city sleeps. The concerns of our own time, our politics, our economies, our digital noise, are a thin, transient layer on the surface of this much older and quieter reality. The stone in this room does not participate in our world. It is an ambassador from a different order of time, a silent witness to a planetary history that runs deeper than our own. The feeling that remains is not one of mystery to be solved, but of a perspective to be held. It is the recognition that our own history is a small, brightly lit room in a vast and ancient house that we have not yet begun to explore. The other rooms are dark, and the keys to their doors have been lost for a very long time. But we know the rooms are there. The sheer, solid weight of this stone is the proof. The inquiry does not end with an answer. It ends with a recalibration of the self. To stand before this object is to feel the immense, silent weight of a forgotten world. It is to understand that the ground is not as solid as it seems, that the past is not as known as we believe. The work of the builders is done. The work of the observer is simply to witness what they left behind, to hold the silence. And so, we leave the object here, in its pool of light. It does not need us. It has waded through ice ages and the birth of nations. It has endured the slow erosion of wind and the slower erosion of human memory. It is a promise of a history larger than our own, a story that is not over, but is merely waiting for the next chapter to be remembered. The light on the stone is the only thing that matters in the room. It defines the shape of the carving, the texture of the surface, the depth of the shadow. It is a single point of illumination in a vast and surrounding darkness, a focal point for a question that will not go away. The silence continues long after we have gone. The stone remains,